On this week's Cosmic Cantina, I break down a recent article relating to the U.S. military's newly rebranded Space Force, which leads us into an interview with Walter Bosley. Walter's research and series of books reveal the possible beginnings of a breakaway society that might be a precursor to the Space Force. Then, Josh dives into an amazing UAP sighting that should have made a bigger splash than it did. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and every week I go to my favorite bar, Cosmic Cantina, and kick back with my co-hosts, Josh Golembeski and Matt O'Connor. We talk about aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, ancient cultures, and anything from the unseen world that needs a little illumination. Welcome to Cosmic Cantina. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and tonight we are drinking a Sauvignon Blanc, white wine, and it's called Josh.
Yes, it is. God, you're tasty.
On a scale of 1 to 10,
Josh.
it's a 10. You're welcome.
Refreshing, a little bitter, but overall,
Sometimes loud.
heady.
But
I like to say
otherwise-
bold yet explosive. A little bit of humor.
Yes.
Can you imagine if
Yeah.
that was on the wine bottle? Bold but explosive.
Gross.
Anyway,
What's that?
it's very good though.
It is. It's
We really
tasty
want
stuff.
spring to come.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. So I don't know if you've seen in the news in the last, 24 hours, they're actually trying to find a location for the new Space Force. And Colorado Springs is out.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know
it's a
why.
shame.
They didn't really go into it. They just said, sorry, you haven't been picked for Space Force. It's like when they're looking for a spot for Google.
Losers.
You
Yeah,
know?
or Amazon.
But apparently Colorado Springs is out.
I mean, we already have a lot of stuff here, though. Right?
Yeah, a lot of bases.
Yeah.
A lot of
We have a lot.
military
Yeah, we
bases.
have like 4 main bases here.
Yeah.
There's one in Cheyenne Mountain, too. Anyway, so Colorado Springs is out. So they're looking for a location for Space Force.
Okay.
But what is Space Force? Right? We know that our president has announced that there is a Space Force, and you're thinking maybe this is a new thing? Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yeah.
Like he just formed Space Force?
It sounds
one
like
night?
a cartoon to me, but I'm sure it's official.
But here's the thing. So actually, the Space Force was called Air Force Space Command in 1947, a division of the Air Force. So in 1947, they created the Air Force Space Command, which is the predecessor for what is now Space Force. So legitimately, there has been a quote-unquote Space Force since 1947.
Okay.
So he just kind of rebranded it and was like, I'm going to just call it Space Force.
I'm going to make it sound awesome.
I'm going to make it sound awesome. So December 20th, 2019, officially, it's an official branch of the Armed Forces.
So it's live now. It's not,
Yeah,
it's
it's
not just a
live.
name, it's a thing. Okay.
It's not just a name, it's a thing. So this brings up a lot of questions. What are they going to be doing? Right? Obviously, things in space.
Right.
And it's
Go
gonna,
get them, boys.
They're going to be bringing freedom and democracy to space.
to the moon and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that because it's it's a division of the armed forces, it's funded by the government, but it can also be funded in other means. So this article says.
Like they give out contracts or they take money from private
Yeah.
corporations?
Right.
Okay.
So then it leads to, would a Space Force mean the end of NASA? Because NASA is where our taxpayers' dollars go. They have to report everything that they are
Right.
working on. We know what they're working on. Yes, it's a very slow process, probably because of that. So what this article is saying is that NASA is going to kind of be this like slow drain until it completely dissolves. And everything will be kind of like private contracting. So, for instance, Space Force needs something to go to wherever, to Mars. They will hire SpaceX or some other kind of government or other contractor to make them whatever they need. So, but then it's like, well, what are they doing? Like, what are they doing in space? But it's legitimately the idea that the next war is going to be in space.
Oh, you think they're weaponizing space?
They're weaponized.
That's why
they
we
are.
rebranded it into
They
a
say
force.
they already say it like in this article that like it's about the next like that's where the next warfare is going to be held is in space because
Okay.
Chinese, Russian satellites,
Yeah.
all that kind of thing.
So
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you said privatizing different companies, it made me think of when they were talking about going to land a drill on an asteroid and start digging for space gold.
Oh, right.
I
Or,
don't know what
Space Gold.
well, or that was in the Obama
Helium.
administration, right? Where they were funding that to break up the asteroid, like kind of like the movie Armageddon or something.
Because there's just like
Just launch nukes at it. That's all you got to do.
yeah.
I've seen that movie.
Send up Bruce Willis.
But then it was for mining too. Like that was kind of under
because
the
it's
rug.
like
We weren't sure what
like
they were
just
doing.
crazy amounts of money worth of minerals, and I mean helium's like a big thing because we're running out of helium right now. Yeah, all sorts of stuff was happening. Space gold.
Yeah,
gold.
I don't even know if that even happened, but it was a big thing.
Is this part of disclosure? I don't know. Just threw it out there. Space Force, a rebranding. It sounds aggressive.
But it's apparently been around since 1947. So
But why the rebrand? To give
Yeah.
to add private money to it.
yeah,
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, you know. Actually, I
guess-
heard it's a good thing. I know there's probably a negative side to that. Obviously, you can go down. But I was listening to a podcast with Rogan and an astronaut. And they were talking about how the restrictions, which you mentioned when you're building things, is so tight within the government. If you go private, they can do things quicker and faster and cheaper and innovate way quicker. They still have to follow the rules, but they don't have to follow all the rules. And it could be a good thing for actually propelling us into the future. But Space Force makes me sounds very military. You know, it sounds very aggressive. It doesn't sound like we're going to explore space and do good things and go to asteroids. It sounds
Yeah.
like we're gonna win the space war, and we're gonna beat up on the Chinese and
Shoot
the
some
Russians.
lasers, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's
Yeah,
kind of
lasers.
exciting though, right?
No, I secretly love it, but you know.
and the next sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
So there's another part to that, right? So let's get into like the maybe not so friendly side of it. Is basically okay if that is the case, if they are creating, if they're preparing for some kind of war in space.
I see where
Are
you're
they
going with this.
like? Are they also defending something, protecting something? Like, is there a colony? Is there like they building stuff out in space that we don't know yet? I mean, we will know once they need personnel to do so. But is that kind of what they're afraid of? And that brings up
Oh, I see. If they set up like mines somewhere on a planet,
and then they're trying to
protect
defend it. Like they're
Yeah.
protecting it. They don't want anybody
I
from
thought you
like
meant,
China,
like, from,
Russia.
like, an ET like attack. They're going to defend us from.
Good luck.
No. I mean, there's tons of people out there that talk about that, but
Yeah.
that's not really what I was saying. But that could happen.
Yeah.
But okay, so if that's the case, then we might be living among almost like a breakaway civilization, which brought me to a writer that actually Matt and I know pretty well, Walter Bosley,
Mr. Bosley.
who writes like a
Yeah.
trilogy of books, who really covers this kind of technology and kind of talks about this kind of like breakaway society in which a bunch of people living among us are kind of building this kind of future, maybe out there, maybe in space, maybe beyond.
And like
where
leaving
we
the
are.
rest of us behind, kind of thing. Doing it incognito.
Incognito until they need us as personnel, right? So yeah, I think he defines it. There's a term called breakaway civilization, which is a Richard Dolan term.
Yeah.
He's calling it breakaway society, but he has a trilogy of books where he covers kind of the beginnings of this, which starts like way before World War One.
Yeah.
really?
Well, yeah. I mean, so you can just thoroughly recommend you going and reading the Empire of the Wheel series, it's a trilogy of books, and actually all of kind of his non-fiction books, Walter Bosley's non-fiction books, will kind of relate to each other. Like he's got another one called
Yeah.
Shining Light, I think, about his dad, and it all kind of relates to the same stuff, like his investigations. But Empire of the Wheel, and you can get his books at lulu.com. You
Yep.
can find his books. They're not on Amazon. So go through lulu.com. But, man, what a wild ride. Empire of the Wheel, parts 1, 2, and 3. So much stuff. I don't even know where to begin trying to tell the story. I guess it begins with a series of ritual murders.
In San Bernardino,
In San Bernardino,
California.
where Walter lives. And
In 1915, correct?
1915 is when it all kind of kicks off. But I mean, we say this is where it starts, but I feel like from reading his books, the force behind this whole breakaway society had been going on for a long time before this.
Well, the thing is that
It's really hard to define in like a nutshell.
so this murder,
So much.
like, creates this ripple effect in the book where you realize, well, he concludes that he thinks this woman that dies is at a place. At a place is the famous wife of Sundance Kid. So Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, famous outlaw. She's part of the Wild Bunch, and he concludes that he thinks this was her. And if it was her, why was it her? And what is she involved in? That's much bigger than just a murder of some random woman, right?
Spoilers, by the way.
Sorry.
They've been out for a while, so I feel like we can spoil it.
But the thing is that he believes that a series of, including this character at a place, were involved in an espionage ring investigating German technology. And one of those groups, secret societies that happened to be in America, that moved here from Berlin. Of course, this is pre World War I, so everyone's pretty riled up about Germany because in Europe there's actually a war going on, right? And America's not involved yet, so there's kind of a pins and needles about people in Germany. So they start the secret society, and the secret society is very strange. It's called NIMSA, and they have, you can look it up. You can look up NIMSA, and there's all these weird drawings and paintings of devices and machines, and one of them actually
so this is sorry to pull you up.
Yeah.
So there's like an offshoot of this that is basically what a lot of people will recognize as the Snorra Aero Club. And the guy, what's his name, Delschau, who did all the drawings of these 1800s flying machines that were like really bizarre and like really detailed and
like steampunk looking shit.
Yeah, a lot of it, yeah. And, there's reports all through the 1800s and into the early 1900s of these crazy ships that people saw flying across the sky.
Yeah, I've heard those stories before.
Right. So it all kind of has to do with this Breakaway Society with a technology far exceeding what they had at the time, obviously. What do they have? Trains and horses and stuff.
Right.
Beginnings of motor cars. These guys had flying ships and stuff. I won't say anti-gravitical because I don't know how they flew, but
yeah, what was their power source? They must have stumbled into something like early on that no one else did, and they just kept it secret.
Yeah.
Well, so Walter makes a point.
Yeah.
So as you can tell, this book is really complicated. But the reason I brought this up is because it's to him, his evidence from like late 1800s is the beginning of the Breakaway Society. So I want to I actually did an interview with Walter because I wanted to talk about that. How does this connect to today? Where do we have evidence of today? And of course, it kind of brought us back to Space Force. So here's the interview.
This concept of breakaway civilizations, the term itself, of course, was coined by Richard Dolan, and he coined it and talked about it within the context of beginning with the World War II era and on up to the modern times. And it would have been involved with the military-industrial complex of the United States via the Germans that we captured and brought over during Operation Paperclip. But when you pull the threads of history and trace all that German involvement and origin, that I just described back into history, it leads you to the Charles Delschau material. It leads you logically to this Prussian group, NIMSA. So it appears that at least, and there could be multiple breakaways, but it appears the breakaway group that is the primary one that gets talked about has its origins with this Prussian group based in what would become Germany, that was fooling around with flying machines and relative technologies that were being developed at that time. Really, one of the big threads that you have is the mysterious Nazi bell. Now, I'm sure your listeners, many of them have heard of and are familiar with the bell, that mysterious object. What, in my research, we were able to find was Delschau actually depicted and drew what is essentially the bell, and he did this prior to 1923 and claimed that this was the propulsion unit of the flying machines of the 1850s. So there you have this thread that if these Prussians and these Germans were fooling around with a rudimentary proof of concept version of the bell, very rudimentary, in the mid-19th century, what I did was I pulled that thread and I laid out how that led to the development of the Nazi bell in the 1920s. So what you have is via technology, it looks like we can trace the origin of this modern breakaway that Dolan's talking about. We can trace it back to the mid-early 19th century.
Wow. And how is our U.S. government tied to this, or if they're not, or is it just